May I ask colleagues on the phone, please, to screen up, please? Welcome to the March 9th Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee, colleagues. As we start, I'll advise you that we are in a virtual meeting during COVID-19. I'd ask those watching or listening to check the city website for current details of COVID-19 service impacts. Meetings can be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact sppc@london.ca. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Colleagues, we have two items on the consent agenda. I've been advised that there are some questions with respect to 2.1 and 2.2, but I've not been asked to pull them for separate voting. Does anyone wish to have them dealt with for separate voting, or can we deal with this all at once, which would include a communication from C. Butler under 2.2? See none, let me deal with this first under 2.1. Any questions with regard to the transition plan progress report? I have Councillor Squire.
Not any questions, but a comment, sir. Last week at planning, Mr. Gastasia was there making presentations with regard to 3 separate affordable housing developments, which by my count, although my math's not good, accounted for 147 new affordable housing units in the City of London. All of us have been in the past sort of impatient to see affordable housing come forward. This is, if anything, Mr. Gastasia's sort of last hurrah in his involvement with the Housing Development Corporation. And I really appreciate it. He's worked hard, and you know, this has taken a long time, but it's really the result of the work of all of the staff at the Housing Development Corporation. We had presentations with regard to 3 separate sites. A lot of work had to be done with neighbors to convince them that affordable housing was going to be a positive for their neighborhood. Councillor Turner did a lot of work in his area to convince people that affordable housing was a great alternative for his neighborhood. And I think that's really good news, and it reflects really well on Mr. Gastasia and his staff during their tenure. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other comments with respect to 2.1? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just a question for you to staff. In this identifies that any potential savings is associated with absorbing the HDC into the civic administration would be moved into direct provision of affordable housing. Will that be quantified for us? I'm still very skeptical of the report that we received that showed that there would be savings. I think it'd be important for us to be able to see any incremental costs associated with moving this into civic administration, and how that materializes over the progress of the implementation here.
Because of the financial nature of the question, I'm not sure if that's Ms. Barbone or Mr. Dickens.
Thank you through the chair. It's Ms. Bourbon. So essentially what we would do is the existing budgets that are in HTC as they're brought in-house would be transferred over in their entirety to the new housing division, so that the amount of the budgets will still remain intact. And then as we work through the transition, they're depending on where the space is, you know, the number of staff, the cost of staff, all of the work that the administrative work. So a good example would be the external audit fee. In 2021, that external audit fee will still need to occur and we will still need a budget. However, in future years, as the HDC is wound up, we will no longer need those costs. So they would switch between the type of expenditure that they are used for, as we no longer need it, say for external audit fees, they will then be shifted into affordable housing support. So we would be keeping the total budget intact and then simply being able to allocate more into the amounts that are available for direct affordable housing. So those changes, certainly as we foresee them, would all be done through an annual budget update, so you can see exactly what those changes would be.
Councillor Turner?
Thank you. So I guess what I'm asking for is that to be explicitly lined out. It sounds like the way Ms. Bourbon describes it is that that we're basically taking the universal budget, moving it over, and so that budget doesn't change. We would, how we see projected $400,000 of savings that was in the KPMG report, moving from there over into housing. I guess just for that to be explicitly outlined, if that actually happens, or if there's incremental costs that you identified, administrative costs that might be associated with, that might have to augment the housing budget as it moves over to help support that. So I could see things like that internal or that external audit fee now becoming an internal audit, but that also has a fee associated with it and an associated cost. So these are my apprehensions with the move, and that it doesn't actually happen the way it was laid out in a pretty superficial report, and that in order for us to be able to justify what we're doing here, then it needs to be clearly laid out at each step, and I'm still not seeing that here, and so that's what I'm asking for at this point.
Are you looking for a formal response from Ms. Bourbon, Mr. Councillor Turner?
I think that, yeah, if I might, the simple question is, will it be explicitly stated as those pluses and minuses as it moves over into the civic administration, just be clearly laid out for this council and future ones as well.
Ms. Bourbon?
Thank you. Through the chair, we can absolutely do that if that's what council wishes us to show exactly what those transitional costs are as the decisions are made. We'd be happy to bring that back to council.
Councillor Turner, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions with respect to the transition plan for progress report? Thank you for that, and thank you for those questions. I'll move to 2.2, the 2021 assessment growth funding allocation with the added communication, as I mentioned previously. Any comments or questions with respect to that? I have Councillor Squire on the list.
I just want to comment on the allocation to London Transit and try to put that in perspective of where transit is now. Of course, I serve on London Transit as chair now with Councillor Helmer, and we recently had our New Year's our service plan going forward, and that's what is going to help. What's going to help us accomplish that is going to be this assessment growth funding. What we're concentrating on in doing this is delivering a transit system that is going to respond to what we've heard from riders as to what they want to see. And in that regard, we're going to be instituting shorter delays in pickups, which is something we always hear about, so that rather than looking to do something sort of grand outside of what we're doing, we're going to make the current system operate better, and that's good for transit users. We're also going to be looking at alternate service delivery models, and of course that will include industrial service, hopefully starting next fall. In terms of just rounding out the idea of finances for London Transit, we have enough funding to have covered any losses we suffered last year, any losses we suffer in this year. So going forward, I believe really firmly that with the work of London Transit, and particularly our staff who's worked really hard, we're in a good position actually moving forward to grow the service and to operate at a really high level. And I really appreciate the work that the commission, including Councillor Helmer and staff, have done for that. We went through some difficult times. We still hear from people who are talking about empty buses. We deal with that, but we're going to make a comeback, and I feel really strongly about that and really positive about where this model is going. And of course, we're going to be getting more money from the federal government. It's like Christmas for transit. And Councillor Helmer at the commission brought a motion to continue to bring forward the idea of electric buses. And hopefully that'll be something that the federal government is willing to get involved in. So things are really, in my opinion, actually working out quite well for London Transit at this time, having weathered the difficulties that we have. So I wanted to make sure council was updated on where we stand as a transit commission.
Well, that's encouraging news on transit. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to comment on assessment growth business case number 21, which is something different than we've done in the past. And I had an opportunity to talk with the treasurer about this, and I would welcome anything additional she'd like to add. But I think it is an interesting approach to look at the cost of growth and how that will impact the infrastructure gap moving forward. Because as we take on newly assumed assets or construct new buildings, obviously that will have repair, maintenance, and life cycle costs as well as replacement costs. And so reflecting that in the assessment growth business cases by setting aside a portion of those costs for the assets that we either assumed or constructed in 2019 would stop us from putting additional pressure on the infrastructure gap through this contribution to the capital infrastructure gap reserve fund. And I think that this is a particularly interesting and innovative approach to allowing us some ability to catch up on our infrastructure gap by using a portion of assessment growth to ensure we aren't adding to it for some new assets. I'm unsure of the time frame that we would continue to do this under, or whether we would continue to fund it at 100% levels, which I presume this is anticipated to be. But I like the approach and I like the idea, and I'm interested in chatting about it further as the years go on and progress. So I thought it was worth mentioning because it's not something we've done this way in the past, and I wanted to commend our treasurer for using this approach to try to help us solve or mitigate the pressure on another problem we have, that being the infrastructure gap.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Worship. My questions are with respect to the police and fire budgets. Have we set, and I've asked this before a few times, and I think the answer ends up being no, but I want to reconfirm this. Have we set a service level target for either policing service or for fire service? We have, on the policing side, there's reference to the 219 officers per 100,000, and there's a graph on there that kind of conflates population with the per 100,000 officer capita per 100,000. The 219, I think the intent over time, and that graph demonstrates it, was to get away from that. Was to try and get the number of officers reduced, because we hadn't really assumed or endorsed the 219 officers per capita number. Likewise, on the fire side of things, the 6 and 6 or the 4 and 4 for firefighters within 4 minutes response time parameter is one that's endorsed by the NFPA, the National Fire Prevention Association in the US. But we don't have a service level standard that's been assigned in London. And I'm not sure if the fire master plan that is underway is going to develop such a standard as well. So doing assessment growth contributions on the basis of not having those standards makes it a little problematic, because it's we don't have the basis for comparison to say, are we meeting the standard that the municipality has set or not, and how much investment is required. So that's specifically to the officers complement, and as well as the Station 15. So the question is, do we have service level standards that are identified, or if not, what movement are we making towards identifying those?
Ms. Barbone.
Thank you through the chair. So with respect to the police, I'll start there. So I don't believe that council is able to set that service level. I believe based on the police board act that there are the police services board determines what the level of the ask is and they bring that forward. So I'm unable to speak specifics as to what those standards are and what's been approved by council specifically through the council and through the finances from that perspective. We simply approve the budget. With respect to the assessment growth process, they provide their business cases to put a case together that based on their needs, consistent with the police budget on what they see their ask is. And my role from an allocation perspective is to ensure that that aligns with the assessment growth policy and that truly the growth is paying for growth. So the requests that they are putting forward, we are ensuring totally meets the policy, and that is the basis of what my allocation is for. With respect to fire, because that is internal, council does in fact set those standards, and I believe the fire master plan is in process right now, and those standards will be coming forward for a council's review, I believe, sometime later at the end of the spring as into the summer.
Councillor Turner?
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. I guess I hope that that's part of the standard or the part of the product that comes out of the fire master plan. I haven't. We've got a survey about what we'd like to see in it, but I haven't seen anything on the scope of the work of the fire master plan yet to this point. So, if that's part of it, that would be great. If it's not, then it's a big miss. And on the other side, on the policing side, I think it's important for us to know what that ratio is or what our target ratio is so that we know as we add so many population to the city, how many officers we need to add correlated to that. Or if there's another indicator, if it's a question of the workload or service provision that is done by the officers, whether that's a violent crime rate or a small crime rate or hours utilization, those kind of things are helpful for us to use. But you're right, that is very much in the purview of the board, but it also helps us as we set the budget to know whether the budget is in line with what that performance standard is. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I have a couple of questions for our staff. So I'm going to ask these as a multi-part question. I'll ask your indulgence. I'll try and be as quick as I can. This is specifically with regard to business case 8, and this is the allocation of funding for a staffing position for the East Lyons Community Center. Colleagues, this position is not going to begin at the start of the fiscal year, April 1st. Simply put, the building is still not ready. So through you, Chair, I do understand that the allocation is needed going forward, but I wonder if our treasurer can comment on why the allocation is coming forward this year for an entire year rather than allocating it in a subsequent year's assessment growth, and just not use one-time funding to cover whatever portion we might need this year. So I'm just wondering if our treasurer can respond to that.
Ms. Barbone, if you would, please.
Yes, thank you. So with respect to assessment growth, when we have a need and we need to fund a full position, we always bring the full cost of the positions through so that there's one business case and then one decision rather than trying to cross years, because it gets very challenging from an allocation perspective to be doing half business cases and trying to prorate. So with respect to the full allocation, we know that at some point, and the hope is that it will open this year and we will be needing the money fully next year to allocate a person. Of course, we still have a little bit of uncertainty with respect to the date, but the money needs to be in place to hire that individual and get them ready to go. So typically when there is surplus in those cases, we would follow the surplus deficit policy, that those amounts then would flow through according to policy. Alternatively, if there is, because this is particularly a unique situation and we know we're not going to need the full amount, typically if there's an allocation of excess assessment growth, we would follow the assessment growth policy where 50% goes to reducing the authorized debt and 50% to the capital infrastructure gap reserve fund. So in this case, because it is going to be a little bit later in the year, that is a process that could be utilized to provide that excess funds according to our policy and add to the $50,000 that is in excess of this year, so that we allocate the full amount and don't have to bring back the business case again next year, knowing that that person should be in place and will require the full budget.
Councillor Lewis?
Well, thank you for that answer, and I appreciate you filling us in on the surplus, because there will be a surplus from this year's allocation. So I was going to ask about that, but you anticipated that and answered my question around that. I guess policy, surplus policy notwithstanding, Mr. Chair, through you, and I'm not sure whether this might be for Mr. Stafford or Ms. Smith, but considering the building is opening much later than the community was initially promised, what sort of programming startups can the community realistically expect that are going to be open to all, including those who might not have the ability to pay when we do open the doors? And is there any potential to use the surplus from the staffing funding that we know we're going to have this year as a one-time source of funding to offer some free programming at the start to the community to make up for the delays on this?
That was three muches, but I'm not sure if that would be Mr. Stafford. I might even ask if that, because there's a financial piece, if that goes back to Ms. Barbone. Mr. Stafford, do you want to start?
Hi, through the chair, it's Ms. Smith. I'm happy to answer that one and then turn it over to Annalisa, if that's okay.
Sure, I got two wrong, so go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. So staff have developed a plan at East Lyons to offer a wide variety of free drop-in programs, try-it programs, which is where folks can try a new activity they've never participated in before, and registered programs for all ages and abilities. It's really something for everyone to get them in the new center when it opens, to have fun and see what a great asset this is for the neighborhood. There'll be a combination of structured and unstructured program opportunities that will really allow Londoners to enjoy the new spaces, including the gym, the pool, the multi-purpose room, the art room, the kitchen, the activity studio. And all of these activities and opportunities will be supported through our current core operating budget.
Councillor Lewis?
Okay, thank you. So what I'm hearing, and I just want to be crystal clear on this from Ms. Smith through you, Chair, is that there are already funds allocated to provide that initial opening programming that will be available to all.
Ms. Smith?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Councillor Lewis?
Wonderful, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I know that she probably can't provide one tonight, so I'll wait for a future Community and Protective Services meeting to ask Ms. Smith if we have an opening date firmed up yet. I will just say in terms of one other item on the agenda for the assessment growth, and that's item 22. I'm really pleased to see that we are allocating some assessment growth towards London Middlesex community housing. Colleagues will will recall a couple of years ago, Councillor Morgan and I brought forward a motion encouraging some assessment growth to be directed to housing and other poverty reduction initiatives. And I definitely see this as helping on the housing front, because we do need to make sure that our assets through London Middlesex community housing are in good shape so that residents can actually enjoy them. So glad to see that in there, and thank you to staff for the work that they've done on this. I know it's not easy because there's only a limited amount of assessment growth available, but there's a lot of service needs for our growing city. I'm not sure if anywhere in here the mayor has requested allocation to update the population on our signs coming into town, but it's significantly higher than the number indicates.
Well, it is, and I might even, as a point of reference to the councillor, mention that when the clerk provided us with information recently, it showed some population of 427,000, just as a reference point, and that's before the formal census is going to be taken. So there you have it. So with that, any other comments or questions with respect to item 2.2? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Is there a mover, please? I see Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Let's call the vote.
Councillor Van Holst.
I vote yay, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Colleagues, there are no scheduled items nor items. One item in the deferred matters and additional business, the service review. And Ms. Barbone, I'm not sure if you'd like to make any comments before any questions might be sought from the group.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Essentially, the province has been very helpful in providing a number of different allocations through the COVID relief, as well as through this audit and accountability fund. There was a very limited time in terms of submitting an application when this pot opened. So Civic Administration came together and identified very, very quickly to be able to put a proposal together to submit to the province. We are now the successful applicants for 2 actual reviews that the city can complete, noting that there is a very, very tight time frame that this work needs to be completed under, and the province was also very helpful in recognizing a bit of an extension to allow us a little bit more time, recognizing the amount of work that we have to do. So with respect to the 2 proposals, we put forward one with respect to our procurement area to look at very close on some of our commodity spends, to look at what kind of savings we might be able to realize through different processes in the future, as well as looking at our parking area and trying to look at a little bit of going to moving towards more of electronic type in nature and modernization of those services. So very, very tight turnaround. We literally received the TPAs on Friday, and they need to be signed within, they were actually hopeful to have them signed within March the 12th. So we apologize for the very, very tight timelines that we're under, but the province is trying to get the funding out to the municipalities before the end of the month when their fiscal year end closes. So happy to answer any questions, but this will certainly give us an ability to complete some additional service reviews with the work of a third-party consultant that we will then bring the reports forward to council and hopefully be able to identify some other opportunities for savings that we could realize and achieve through future budgets.
Do we have comments or questions for Ms. Barbone? I see Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Barbone, for the recommendation coming to us today. I'm glad to see the provincial government giving you that extension. I know it's busy time, so to get these agreements in place, it's always good to have a bit more time. My question through you, Mr. Chair, to staff is around our parking. I understand we're going to go through another review of our parking services. And Ms. Barbone, you touched upon what changes we're looking at when it comes to more automated parking services, but I want to have a better understanding exactly what parking services are we talking about. I know we've made some changes in our parking services, and having a better understanding of what this review is going to look like.
Ms. Barbone?
Yes, thank you. So essentially, as you know, parking services have been brought in-house. So this is really looking at how we can modernize and provide better customer service and look at utilizing as many opportunities to go electronic ways of trying to provide better customer service and identify some opportunities across the services being offered from the City of London's perspective. So it's really trying to take the way, now that we're bringing it in-house, it's a perfect opportunity to be able to look at how that can be implemented as effectively and efficiently as possible, as well as to achieve better customer service overall to the customers that they serve.
Ms. Hopkins, Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, thank you for that. And just as a follow-up, will this report be going to the audit committee, or would it go to, I guess, just trying to have a better understanding where these reports will go back to SBPC or to standing committees where appropriate?
Ms. Barbone?
Thank you through the chair. So now the procurement one, I assume, and we would look to the clerk to confirm what the appropriate standing committees would be. But whether that is civic works or whatever planning, wherever parking normally would go is the appropriate standing committee, that report will come forward through that. So no, it would not be the audit committee. It'll be the appropriate standing committee that the clerk will ensure that we adhere to the civic admin bylaw.
Councillor?
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions for Treasurer? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and seconder, please, for the report. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Morgan. We'll call the vote.
Councillor Sully. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thanks very much. I'll now look for a motion to go into closed session. Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Turner. We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
I'll give us a moment, colleagues, as we make the appropriate adjustments.